All right, so thank you for the invitation, and good afternoon, everyone. It's morning here in Boston. It's 9 a.m. So you all gave me the excuse to get dressed this morning. I've been wearing a tracksuit for the last 5 weeks in quarantine, so thank you. So I guess if I take it back to my times at Merchants and decisions around A levels, I was saying to Vicky, it's an interesting story because I, in a lot of respects, really struggled at school. And when I was choosing A levels, it was a really hard decision because initially my dream was to be a vet, and I quickly realised that the results that I would need to get a place at university to be a vet was highly unlikely. So I decided to choose subjects that I felt I would enjoy. I knew it was going to be hard work. And therefore it was going to be really important to enjoy what I was doing. So the A levels that I chose were history, British government and politics, and biology, and then general studies. I'm not sure whether that's still an option, but that was something that we had to do. So I did those for A levels, and a bit of a mixed bag because normally people either gravitate towards science or gravitate towards the arts. And I did a combination, and I wanted biology in there because even though I knew I would probably never make it as a vet, I was so interested and passionate about science, and the human sciences especially. And I knew that whatever my career would look like, it would probably include something science related. So I felt it was really important to have that biology as a component. And then I guess decisions, following on from that to get to university. And again, interestingly, I didn't get the results that I wanted at A level. And when I was choosing, universities and going through the UCAS form, it was a real struggle because I was determined to study psychology. And the grades that I needed for psychology at the majority of universities were pretty much all A's. It was a very, very competitive course to get onto. And I was determined that was what I wanted to do. So the universities that I looked at were not the red brick universities, and the universities that would allow me to enter and study psychology with lower grades. As it happened, I didn't get the result that I wanted, so I had to go through clearing, which was an interesting experience because I didn't really know what to expect. And actually, one of my good friends, Ali Davis, who went to the school all the way from Stanfield, her dad was a real support and taught me through how I needed to handle those phone calls and helped to get me through clearing and get a place. So I'm incredibly grateful to him. And I managed to get an acceptance at the University of Sunderland to study BSc psychology, which was what I wanted to do. So that was where I went to go and study that for 3 years up in the northeast. Oh, Vicky, I've lost your sound.
Psychology is still incredibly competitive now. There's still a really competitive course to get onto.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting, and I think it can set you up for so many things. And one of the learnings, and when I look back as you're contemplating and working through which courses you want to apply for and the universities that you want to go to, I think it's really important to bear in mind that there are so many different paths to get you to where you want to get to. And looking back, I don't regret any decisions I made, but I didn't really appreciate and understand that there were other options to maybe, take another course and after 12 months convert to psychology, or do some sort of combination degree and then specialize in psychology in the later years, in years 2 or 3, or do a 4-year course. So I think, looking back, I wasn't aware of all the options available to me. And I think that's something that is really important to consider. and to plan for. So if you don't get the results that you hope for, and you have to make some decisions, just try and have those scenarios mapped out. So you know what your options are, and take advice from people as well, from, you know, your teachers, from family, from people who've been through it, because at the time, for me, in all honesty, it felt like the sky had fallen a little bit, because I felt like it was going to define the rest of my life, and it was going to define my career, and it really doesn't. I was saying to Vicky earlier, we were chatting, A-levels are so critically important because they give you the ticket to entry to be able to have those conversations. Without that, you often don't even get the ability to have a dialogue, to be accepted into universities that you want, to study the subjects that you want. But at the same time, as time goes on, it's not life-defining. So if it doesn't go as planned, it's okay. I can't even remember the grades that I got for my A-levels now. It's probably because they weren't impressive. But at the same time, it's not important. And once you get your experience and you get into the working world, you realize that it's not a big a deal as it was when you're 17, 18 going through it. So it's good to just keep that perspective too, especially if things don't go to plan.
So was your degree a 3-year degree, Sally?
I did, and actually, I loved psychology so much, and I really enjoyed the clinical aspect of it, understanding, you know, the diagnosis around mental illness, the treatment options, studying behavioral science. I was so passionate about it and pretty good at it too. And so in my second year, I was actually considering continuing and doing a master's in clinical psychology. And that was sort of what I really wanted to do, but it just became apparent that, you know, after getting into a lot of debt in my 3 years, it was something that I couldn't continue to study, and I couldn't afford to continue to study. So I graduated in the 3 years, graduated with a 2-1. And then knew that I had to get a job pretty quickly to start paying off the debt that I'd racked up, and so that was the main reason why I didn't continue with my studies and go and get my master's.
So what did you do straight after uni then, Sally?
I actually I applied for the industry before I even graduated, and I remember speaking to one of my friends called Ian at university, and really wondering what I was going to do. And he knew that I had an ambition to get my master's, to go into clinical psychology, but he also knew I needed a job. So he said, why don't you consider becoming a medical sales representative and joining the pharmaceutical industry? It's a good job. It pays well. There's a lot of career opportunities. It's science-based, which is what I was so passionate about. And my plan was to join the industry for a couple of years, pay off some debt, make some connections in the industry and in the medical community, which would then hopefully support an application to go back to university to do clinical psychology. So that was sort of the mindset. I did a couple of months as I was applying. It's incredibly competitive to get in. You either need a really strong science background, and they also prefer you to have some sort of direct sales experience. So I got numerous rejections, and I did 6 months as a recruitment consultant, which I really enjoyed actually, and got my first sort of experience in the working world. And then I joined a company called Servier, who hired me with no sales experience, and gave me a chance. And I joined them pretty much 6 to 9 months after I graduated as a medical representative in Manchester. So Manchester was my territory, and I left home, moved in with a few friends in Manchester, and started working for them.
And what did you do from there, Sally? So how long did you work for, was it Serbia you said?
Yeah, I was with them probably only 18 months actually. And the reason being is I loved the industry. I loved the job. It was almost the perfect combination for me of science with business. And I found it just incredibly rewarding and dynamic. But I was getting a little bit bored with what I was doing. So at the time I was educating physicians on cardiovascular medications, diabetes medications, and as important as they are, there are many, many products available to treat those conditions. And I was getting a little bit bored and was eager to move more into specialty medicine and specialty care where there's a greater unmet need and therefore a greater need and interest in education and support from industry in some respects. So I was with them for 18 months and then moved to another, couple of companies and eventually ended up in the world of oncology and then now rare disease, which is, I find personally, the most interesting space in medicine because there is such a huge unmet need. There is so much that is not understood about rare disease. And there's very few companies that are in that space to really help to support appropriate diagnosis and appropriate utilization of therapy. So it's probably the most rewarding place to be, I think, in the industry overall.
Okay, so what does your, obviously not at the moment, but normally what would your day look like, Sally?
It's really varied, and everybody probably says this, but it's so true. There's no day that really looks the same. And I think my current role now as leading and head of the national sales team in the US is probably split 50% in the office normally when the office is open, and 50% in the field with my team. So when I'm in the office, I'm generally part of cross-functional teams, meetings to develop the strategic direction for my team. I work very closely with marketing to ensure that the direction that we're going in is appropriate, that we understand the changing market dynamics and how that is going to impact how we need to execute in the field. Work very closely with our medical colleagues, a mix of scientists and physicians and clinicians from the medical community to understand how the landscape is changing, other products that are coming into the market, research is ongoing that could impact and have an influence on the education that we provide as a team, and work very closely with our finance partners, business operations, and legal and compliance as well, which I was saying to Vicky earlier, it's an interesting industry to be in because it's arguably the most highly regulated industry in the world. And rightly so, because of the responsibility that we have in providing education and information to healthcare providers. And also in the US, we can obviously directly engage through marketing efforts, not our sales team, but directly engage with patients to provide information and education to the patient community too. So it's a huge responsibility that we have to make sure that information is accurate and appropriate. So therefore, we're really highly regulated. So I have conversations with my lawyers and my compliance partners daily, a few times a day, often, to make sure that we're on the right track and we're doing things in the right way. So that's when I'm in the office. And then when I'm out, which is probably 50% of the time, it's attending medical conferences, engaging with the medical community, meeting with physicians, with professors of medicine, and spending time with my team, coaching my team. I have a group of sales leaders and then sales representatives that report to me. And a big part of my job is to make sure that they have what they need to be successful, and supporting their career development within the organization as well. So that's a big piece of what I do.
So one of the students has asked, so do you feel that your work is mostly sales and marketing rather than researching medical development?
Yeah, absolutely. The industry is split down the middle. commercial to the medical side and research and development, and that's really important because it maintains the integrity of the science. So while I'm part of an organization that is responsible for researching and developing products to treat rare diseases, and we are involved in some of those conversations, the sales organization and the commercial organization is in a lot of ways kept separate from that. Because any conversations that we have with physicians clearly are only around products that are approved and in the market, and we're bound by whatever is in the SMPC or in the label, and obviously can't have any conversations about products that are not approved and products that are in development. So that's really the responsibility of our R&D team and our medical colleagues. So it's definitely more heavily weighted, completely weighted on the commercial side and sales and marketing, in my position anyway. But there is, so many roles within the industry that are heavily focused on research and development that are really rewarding roles as well.
From Manchester to the States, was that because of the company you went to work for, or was that for other reasons?
It was a bit of a combination, Vicky. So I actually went from Manchester to London. So I spent a couple of years in Manchester, and then when I moved into marketing, a lot of the head offices are based in London for biotech and pharmaceutical companies, and you need to be in-house. So when I moved into a marketing role, I moved down to London and spent 5 years there. And as I was progressing in my career, and I was involved in global teams to really drive the strategic direction of the company, I started to realize that although the UK, I was representing the UK and Ireland, and although the UK and Ireland always had a seat at the table, their influence was diminishing, and the influence of the US was increasing. So given the US, the size of the market, and the way that the healthcare is set up here, the opportunity is greater. So I started to see this dynamic when I was in global meetings with people from Asia, people from the US, people from Europe. And I really wanted to be at the forefront of driving those strategic decisions and feeling like I was having a bigger impact. So I actually joined an organization with the hope and the ambition of moving to the United States. So I also fell in love with New York City. So when I visited New York for the first time, I knew that if there was ever an opportunity to move to the United States, that's where I wanted to be. So the company that I chose to work for in the UK, their US affiliate and their US office was based just outside New York. So I was quite intentional in making connections with the US team and building relationships with the head of the business in the US, and spent a lot of time with them during the global meetings as we were preparing for a product launch. And actually it was, and this is, what I'll probably talk about this a couple of times, but good things that come out of, bad situations. And it's always so important to be open to those opportunities, because that's how it happens. So I remember we were at a conference in Italy, a big medical oncology conference, and we were due to get approval from the FDA for our product just before that meeting. And as, unfortunately it happens many, many times, drugs fail during the clinical trial process. And the product that we were due to launch didn't fail, but the FDA required additional information and would require more studies to be able to support the approval. So there was essentially a delay in the approval for this product. And I was sat next to the head of the US business when that announcement was made. And he said, "What are we going to do? We've got another 2 or 3 years before we can launch this product. And what are we going to do for 2 or 3 years?" And I was bold, and I said, "Kevin, I'll come and work for you. I'll come to the US. And it gives me a couple of years to understand the market and know the market. And then the US is pretty much, not always, but pretty much the first country to launch. So then I knew that would be a real opportunity for me to go and get my US experience, launch the product in the US, and join that team and have a greater degree of responsibility and progress my career. And I remember waking up the next day thinking, oh my God, what did I say? What did I do? And I got a text off Kevin, and he said, I remember the conversation last night, let's meet for coffee this morning. And that's pretty much how it happened. And they took a chance on me and transferred me over to the US, and I got to live my dream of living in New York City for a couple of years, which was pretty spectacular.
How long have you been there now for, Sally?
I've been in the US, I think it's year 7.
Okay. And no intentions of coming back to the UK?
I don't know, I mean, I love it here, and it's given me so much more opportunity than I would have got in Europe or back in the UK, just because of the scale of the industry in the US. But I miss home. I miss my family, my best friends. That most of them are all from merchants, actually, and we're still really, really close. And most of them are still in the UK. And so yeah, I really miss it. But I think where I am now, and because of the industry that I'm in, the US is responsible for, dependent upon disease states, it varies, but on average responsible for between 50 and 70% of the global business and the global revenue. So decisions are really made at the US level. And because they're first to launch, you're at the forefront of everything. So I don't see myself going back to the UK, but you never know. You never know what opportunities come up, and I'm always open to considering anything. So we'll see.
Another question's coming from a student. She's asked, what characteristics and educational background do you need to begin in this field of work and be successful?
It's a really good question, actually, because I think I've been successful in this industry because of attributes and characteristics that aren't necessarily related to academia. And I think you need to have a certain level of intelligence, because, you're dealing with science, and science moves on every day. And you've got to have the aptitude to be able to understand that. You have to be able to have informed, intelligent conversations with physicians, because at times you're partnering with them to support the diagnosis of patients. So you have to be able to have, it's not a peer-to-peer conversation because I'm not medically trained, but you have to be able to have a dialogue at that level. So you need to have that level of acumen and that passion about science to be able to do that. But I think the characteristics and attributes which allow people to really excel in this environment are more the softer skills, if you like, but it's the learning agility, being able to deal with uncertainty, self-confidence, and resilience, because this industry is high risk, high reward at all levels. And again, the statistics vary, but I think on average only 15% of products actually get through the clinical trials and are approved by the FDA and then go to market. So even from the offset, it's a very volatile industry, and it evolves very quickly. So you have to be adaptable, and you have to have that agility to be able to navigate that uncertain world, while also having an eye on what the future holds, and being innovative in your approach. So a lot of things, but I think the take-home message is you need a certain level of intellect to be able to do well, but it's those softer skills that I think really help people to excel in this industry.
Another student's asked a sort of more university-focused question. So they've said, do you think a 4-year biology degree with a year in industry, so a sandwich year degree, is more or less useful than your average sort of 3-year bachelor's, and then doing a master's in biological entrepreneurship? Which one do you think would be more useful? So a year in industry or a master's, basically?
I would say a year in industry is so beneficial, and honestly, the sooner that you can get hands-on experience, the better, because it really gives you a working understanding and knowledge of how the business works, and that is critical. It also gives you the experience of how to navigate in this uncertain world, and it's forever changing. So you have to be able to demonstrate that you can be agile, all of those things that we spoke about, and be innovative in your thinking, be creative, be resilient. So experience really gives you that. But the other part of it that is really critically important, that honestly it took me a good 10 years to learn, is you really need people around you to support you, and you can't go alone. You can't do anything alone. And I think if you have the opportunity to do a secondment or an internship or a year in industry, whatever it looks like in any industry, you start to build those connections and build that network. And those people can really help to catapult your career, because you will find, especially in the early years, people will see things in you and they'll see your potential before you even see it in yourself. But you have to expose yourself to those individuals for enable them, so they can do that and they can see that in you, and they can really help to support your career progression, and support you in your applications, especially in the early years. It's incredibly competitive throughout your whole life, but in those early years it is, because it's very hard to differentiate yourself, especially when everybody goes through the same education and everybody comes out with the same degrees. So you really need to think about what's going to differentiate you versus the other candidates that are applying for roles. And that in-house experience, whatever it looks like, is, I think, a real differentiator. And even now, when I interview people, and I'm heavily involved in interviewing for internships. So MBA internships in the US is a huge thing. And every year we bring students in, and those students who may have 3, 4, sometimes 5 degrees under their belt but have no hands-on experience, I'm less inclined to hire them, because I don't know how they're going to be able to navigate the working world. So somebody who has that experience, I always favor, because it gives me greater confidence that they're going to be okay and they're going to be able to deal with it, and they've developed some of those skills that are so critically important in the working world.
Yeah, I think the information that we have available to us at the moment is that a year in industry really does pay dividends in terms of future progression and careers. Lots of universities are saying that there is obviously value in a master's, and they're not going to say otherwise. But I think the big push at the moment is possibly to do the year in industry, to start somewhere, and then possibly do a master's afterwards once you know what you're truly interested in. And I think that's possibly a really good route. I don't know whether you agree, Sally.
Yeah, Vicky, I totally agree. I think it's, and again, it depends on your situation and what you want to do. And there are certain roles in the biotech industry that require a master's or require a doctorate. So again, if the job that you want, if that's the entry criteria, then you have to do it. But more often than not, there's, like I said earlier, there's different routes. There's always, numerous paths to get you to where you want to be. And I think if you're in a situation and you take that 4-year course, you do a year in industry, and they offer you a position, take it. If they don't, then you can consider, okay, do I continue to study and then come back to it? But if somebody offers you something, 9 times out of 10, just take it, because you never know what doors are going to open. And you know, I always wanted to go back and do my master's in clinical psychology, and then I joined an industry that I just fell in love with, and I haven't looked back, because my career started to progress and I started to see opportunity. And then I was like, you know what, maybe now I don't want to go back and do clinical psychology anymore. I love what I'm doing. So I think, you know, you've all really got to just be open to those opportunities. And if people offer you something, it's because they see the potential in you. And I would grab those opportunities with both hands, because you've always got the other options, and you can always, you know, go back. But if you miss out on opportunities, you never know when the next one's going to come along. So that would probably be my advice and my perspective on it. And I know everyone's different.
Somebody's asked, does your career in marketing and sales provide a good work-life balance?
It does and it doesn't. And I think, and I have a responsibility for that. So I think it does. I think the decisions that I've personally made have meant that I've put my career before my personal life. But that was a choice that I made, because I wanted to travel and I wanted to see the world. So I've moved every couple of years. I moved from Manchester to London, London to New York. And then after 3 years in New York, I actually had the opportunity to go to San Francisco in California for 2 years. And I took it. But then it meant that I uprooted my life again to go and move to the West Coast. And then after 2 years of California, I moved to Boston, back to the East Coast. So every couple of years I keep moving, but I love it, because it's a big adventure. And I love learning about different cultures and living in different places and meeting different people. It's where I get my energy. But you really have to take ownership and define that work-life balance yourself. And this industry does give you that balance if you choose. If you choose to put 100% into your career, then it'll give you that too. So I think it's a personal choice, and I think any career that you go into, if you work really hard, there are sacrifices, because the hours are long. And you know, when the world is normal, my travel schedule is insane. So I'm on flights, 2 or 3 flights a week, probably 2 or 3 weeks out of every month. And you know, if I haven't got a family or children, but if I did, that it would be incredibly challenging to be able to do the job I do.
Somebody's asked, was psychology A-level an option when you were in sixth form, or any kind of work experience for psychology?
You know, it wasn't. I wish it had been, because I loved it when I studied at a university. So yeah, it wasn't an option back in, I guess, 1995, 6, I think, a long time ago. And work experience was really challenging, especially because of the area that I was interested in. So I did have a conversation with a clinical psychologist who specialized in the behavioral science and severe mental illness actually related to crime. And that's really where I was interested. But he said, there's absolutely no way you can come and shadow me for a day, because of the cases that he was involved with, it just wouldn't be safe. So there were no options that I knew of that would have given me exposure to, you know, that world and life as a clinical psychologist. So that was pretty challenging, actually.
I've got a question. So obviously you're dealing with vaccinations, and you're dealing with both the research side. I'm just wondering about, I know you can't answer this directly, but I'm just wondering, there's lots of talk sort of within particularly the UK government about trying to get a vaccination for coronavirus. And obviously, you know, you talked before about the years it takes to get these things to market and to make sure they're suitable for the general public. And you spoke before about the one that was put on hold for 2 or 3 years before you could do anything more with it. What are your thoughts on sort of rushing through this vaccination for coronavirus?
Yeah, I think, first of all, it's encouraging. And it makes me feel incredibly proud of being part of an industry that again is so nimble and can rise to the challenge during times of crises. And the partnership and collaboration that I've seen between companies, which doesn't really happen, between companies and the government, between companies and regulatory bodies like the FDA and the EMEA in Europe. It's been elevated to a whole new level to do everything that we can to help support patients and address the current crisis. So I think it's really encouraging. There are so many companies that are working on clinical trials to investigate products that are currently on the market and approved to treat other conditions. So a lot of those trials are going on now. They obviously take time, but I think during times like this, where there's a need, an urgent need, that's where industry and regulatory bodies are really partnering to understand how it can be accelerated and how these processes can be accelerated while still maintaining the safety measures in place, which is so critical. Nobody wants to, approve a product without fully understanding the safety and tolerability profile and whether the benefit outweighs the risks and everything else that clinical trials determine. So it's a tricky situation because you've always got that balance. But I think coming out of this, I hope that it will, in some respects, change the industry for the better by, in certain situations, enabling an acceleration of clinical trials and of studying products so that we can hopefully get products to market sooner to serve the patients that need them. So it's certainly an interesting time, and I do think that the industry will look a little bit different coming out of this and for the better as well.
Does anybody have any more questions for Sally in the conversation box? I think there's a couple coming through, Sally. Somebody's asked, what was your best memory of school, Sally, when you were at school?
There are so many. And honestly, the funny thing about it is my fondest memories now are of moments that at the time were probably not enjoyable. So I think back to, my friends and I still laugh about Miss Suyov chasing us around Hall Road in the freezing cold and that wind coming at you in your gym knickers and athletics vest, and it was like the depths of winter in December. And just the ridiculousness of it, and all struggling to do our, 3,000 meters or whatever it was around Hall Road. And it's just, I don't know, there's so many fond memories of really, I guess it boils down to just building meaningful relationships and friendships. And those memories I'm still, like I say, really, really good friends. Most of my best friends are still my best friends that I met at Merchants. There's a group of about 7 or 8 of us, and every time we get together, we spend a lot of time talking about those fun memories from school. But it's often things like that, things that at the time were not so enjoyable, but looking back, pretty hilarious.
Right, well, I think there's a couple of questions coming in, but what I would say is that if any students don't have any questions, you're more than welcome to leave the chat. Sally, we're very, very grateful for your time all the way over in Boston, and that was a really informative chat. If anybody does have any remaining questions, then please stay in the chat, and Sally and I will, and we'll answer them. But if you don't, take care, everybody, and I'll probably see you next week. There's a couple of questions, Sally, coming in. So, what subject areas do you target when you hire people? Are there any specific degrees you look for? I
think I'm trying to think back to when I was in the UK, because it's a little bit different over in the US with the criteria that's required to join the industry. In the UK, science helps, any science, because of the the requirement to be able to understand clinical data and have a, you know, intelligent conversation around it. So I think whether it's a science A level or a degree that is a BSc, I think that's fine. It really depends on the role you want to go in. If you want to join the industry and go on the medical side or the research and development side, then the criteria will be different. But to join the commercial organisation, you just need some science somewhere, either at A level or for your degree. But I wouldn't worry too much about specifics, because it really is just demonstrating that you have a passion for science and that you can get your head around it.
Somebody's asked, do you think a cure is better or a vaccine in the current situation? They've said considering there is no proof of coronavirus leaving enough memory cells to make the body resistant even after being infected twice.
I honestly, that's a brilliant question. Whoever that is should go into research and development. But I mean, who knows? There is so much unknown about the virus, and we're learning all the time. But viruses, you know, evolve. So that's something that needs to be considered as well. And honestly, I think if you can get to a cure, that's always the best option. That's always what you want. But it's very rarely achieved. So I think if we can get to a vaccine, which we'll get to quicker, I think the estimations are around, you know, between 9 months, 12 months, 18 months. I think that's a good first step, but I think there's so much that we just don't understand about the virus and how it's going to evolve over time that it's incredibly difficult to say.
There is a question before this one, but I think this one probably links to what we're talking about. Do you think the vaccine for coronavirus could be sort of similar to the vaccine they're trying to find for HIV in the fact that there's probably limited hope for success, or do you think it's something that they can have success with?
I think the hope is that a vaccine will be successful to a degree. Yeah. I think with everything, it doesn't work. Vaccines don't work in all patients. So I think that doesn't mean it's not successful. That just means that there's more work to be done. So I think everybody is hopeful because there's so much work going on and there is so much optimism that a vaccine will be able to be developed that will help. I can't imagine it's going to solve the problem completely because it never does. The flu vaccine doesn't either, but it gives some protection that is so well needed.
Somebody's asked, do you have any recommendations for graduate internships? Graduate schemes or intern schemes, either at university or when they leave university. Any companies that you would look out for, Sally, that you know that offer good opportunities for students?
Yeah, I mean, there's all of them, I would say, Vicky, and I'm happy. I mean, I can pull together, you know, a list, or if anyone is particularly interested, I can provide contacts of, you know, companies in the UK and Europe where I still have colleagues and friends that work there that could help support. But most companies will offer those programs because they're so invested in ensuring that they identify talented individuals and bring talented individuals into the organization. So, but I can certainly send you a list, Vicky, and if that individual wants to connect, I'm happy to do that as well.
That would be fantastic if you could, Sally. Yeah, would absolutely take you up on that offer. Yeah. Lots of students are leaving the talk now, but they're all saying thank you. People are saying the list would be highly appreciated. Thanks for the talk. That's. I'm just waiting to see if there's any more messages. Yeah, thank you, they're saying. I think they're leaving slowly but surely now. We'll be the last two standing, I think.
That's all right.